evening, everyone. Oh, my dear. Even worse today, I was 9 minutes in and I got interrupted. So I've decided not to try and paste two halves together because I'll probably bugger it up. So I'm going to start again on part 2 of Stave 3, The Ghost of Christmas Present. Last time we were with Scrooge, he was stood on the prow of a ship in the middle of the sea with the ghost of Christmas Present. And whilst there, this happens. It was a great surprise to Scrooge while listening to the moaning of the wind and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths were as secret and profound as death. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognise it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at the same nephew with approving affability. Laughed Scrooge's nephew. If you should happen, by any unlikely chance, to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me, and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world more irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humour. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live, cried Scrooge's nephew. He believed it too. More shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's nephew indignantly. Bless those women, they never do anything by halves, they are always in earnest. She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking, capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, all good kinds of good little dots about her chin that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head. I know, but it was written a long time ago. Although, altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, you know, but satisfactory too. Oh, perfectly satisfactory. How marvellous to be called satisfactory. I do hope you will find me a satisfactory little creature. Well, he's a comical old fellow, said Scrooge's nephew. That's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. I'm sure he is very rich, Fred, hinted Scrooge's niece. At least you always tell me so. What of that, my dear, said Scrooge's nephew. His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it. Ugh, I have no patience with him, observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sisters and all the other ladies expressed the same opinion. Oh, I have, said Scrooge's nephew. I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it in his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't miss much of a dinner. Indeed, I think he loses very much of a good dinner, interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have been competent judges, because they had just had dinner, and with the dessert upon the table were clustered around the fire by lamplight. Well, I'm very glad to hear it, said Scrooge's nephew, because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper? Ugh, can you imagine somebody called Topper? Topper had clearly got his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. whereat Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. "Do go on, Fred," said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. "He never finishes what he begins to say. Such a ridiculous fellow." Scrooge's nephew revelled in another laugh, and as it was impossible to keep the infection off, though the plump sister tried hard to do with aromatic vinegar, his example was unanimously followed. "I was only going to say," said Scrooge's nephew, "the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, I think, that he loses some very pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help think better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, 'Uncle Scrooge, how are you?' if only it puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something." And I think I shook him yesterday. It was their turn to laugh now, as the notion of his shaking Scrooge. But being thoroughly good-natured, and not much caring that they laughed at him, they laughed at any rate. He encouraged them in their merriment, and passed for the bottle joyously. Very hot. I'm feeling a bit poorly, so I keep getting hot. Oh, now my washing machine's going insane. I think it's created a Gordian laundry knot. After tea, they had some music. I'm just going to shout over it. For they were a musical family. I knew what they were about when they sung a glee or a catch. I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in the bass like a good one, and never swell the large veins in his forehead or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played, among other tunes, a simple little air, a mere nothing, you might learn to whistle it in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When this strain of music sounded, all the things the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and though that if he could have listened, sorry, it's got a typo in it, as though that if he could have listened to it often years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life in his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while they played at forfeits, for it's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Stop! There was first a game at blind man's buff, of course there was, and I no more believe Topper was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him, Scrooge's nephew, and that the ghost of Christmas present knew it. The way he went after that plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature, knocking down fire irons, tumbling over the chairs, bumping against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she went, there went he. He always knew where the plump sister was, and he wouldn't catch anybody else. If you had fallen up against him, and some of them did, he stood there. He would have made a feign of endeavouring to seize you, which would have been an affront to your understanding, and would instantly have sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried out that it wasn't fair, and really it was not. Men. But when at last he caught her, when, in spite of all of her silken rustlings and her rapid flutterings past him, he got her into a corner whence there was no escape, then his conduct was most execrable, for his pretending not to know her, he pretending it was necessary to touch her head-dress, and further assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger, and a certain chain about her neck. It was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it, when, another blind man being in the office, they were so confidential together behind the curtains. My. Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's bluff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner, where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her. But she joined in the forfeits, and to loved her love to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise, at the game of How, When, and Where, she was very great, and to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow, though they were sharp girls too, as Topper could have told you. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, all wholly forgetting, in the interest he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound to their ears. He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed right too, for the sharpest needle, the best Whitechapel, warranted not to cut in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in his head to be. In other words, he might have been an old bugger, but he was a clever old bugger. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such a favour that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But in this the spirit said could not be done. Here is a new game, said Scrooge, 1/2 hour, spirit, only one. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what, he only answering to their questions yes or no as to what the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every fresh question that was put to him, his nephew burst up into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up the sofa and stamp. At last the plump sister, falling into a similar state, I'm so hot, cried out, I have found it. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is. What is it? Cried Fred. It's your Uncle Scrooge. Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes, inasmuch as an answer in the negative was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge, supposing that they never had any tendency that way. He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred, and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here is a glass of malt wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an inaudible speech, if the ghost had let him. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last word spoken by his nephew, and he and his spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful, on foreign lands, and they were close at home, by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope, by poverty, and it was rich, in almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out. He left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older. Clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it, until they left a children's 12th night party, when, observing at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was grey. Are spirits' lives so short? Asked Scrooge. My life upon this globe is very brief, replied the ghost. It ends tonight. Tonight? Cried Scrooge. Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near. The chimes were ringing at the 11:15 at that moment. Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. I'm sorry, that bit always makes me laugh. Oh. Is it a foot or a claw? It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it, was the spirit's sorrowful reply. Look here. From the foldings of its robe it brought forth 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, and miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Oh, man, look here! Look down here! Exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, their stale and shrivelled hand, like that of age, had pinched and twisted them, and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade. Through all the mysteries of wonderful creation, as monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be party to a lie of such enormous magnitude. Lentil, can you stop, please? Stop nibbling yourself. It's very rude. You're not allowed to chew on your bits and pieces while I'm reading. You're a cheeky boy. Oh, it's just fallen down. What are you doing? Hi. Look, there's Lentil. What are you doing? Hey, little man. You're a strange little guy. You enjoying the reading? Yeah? Don't lick me. Especially not after what you've been doing. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge could say no more. They are man's, said the spirit, looking down at them, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, cried the spirit, stretching out his hand towards the city. Slander all those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end. Have they no refuge or resource? Cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Said the spirit, turning on him for one last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. At the last stroke ceased to vibrate. He remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. Stave 4. The last of the spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. "You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not yet happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind that dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon his, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand, and on one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge, "lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them, and to encompass them of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on 'Change, amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down, and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great old gold seals, and so forth, and Scrooge has seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of business men. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said the great fat man with a monstrous chin, "I don't know that much about it. Either way, I only know he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. "I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first, with a yawn. "What has he done with the money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey cock. "I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. Hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker, "for upon my life I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer?" "I don't mind if lunch is provided." "Oh, let me get my lap," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. "But I must be fed, if I make one." Another laugh. "Well, I am the most disinterested among you after all," said the first speaker, "for I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anyone else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure if I wasn't his first particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye." Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on to a street. Its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, and thinking that the explanations might lie there. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and of great importance. He had made a point of always standing well in their esteem in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first, "old Scratch has finally got his own at last, hey?" "Oh, so I am told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose?" No, something else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial. But feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it might be likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was the past, and this ghost's province was the future. Nor could he think of anyone immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them. But, nothing doubting that to whomsoever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement, he resolved to treasure up every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared, for he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him some clue he missed, and would render solution to these riddles easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him a little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped that he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of its hand, and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town, where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognised its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, and ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged themselves of their offences and smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, with misery. Far in this den of infamous resort, there was a very low-browed beetling shop, below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in the mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat and sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt with, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a grey-haired rascal nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frowsy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters hung up upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh. "Let the charwoman alone to be the first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance if we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlour. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, how it squeaks! There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe, and I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlour, come into the parlour." The parlour was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair-rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. When he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. What odds then, Mrs. Dilber, said the woman. Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. That's true indeed, said the laundress, no man more so. Aye then, don't stand staring as if you were afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose? Oh, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. We should hope not. Very well, then, cried the woman. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose? No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. If he wanted to keep 'em after he's dead, wicked old screw, pursued the woman, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last, there alone by himself. It's the truest word that ever was spoke, said Mrs. Dilber. It's a judgment on him. I wish it had been a little heavier judgment, replied the woman, and it should have been, you may depend upon it. I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We knew pretty well what we was helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive, a seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value at all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked up the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found that there was nothing more to give. That's your account, said Joe. I wouldn't give another sixpence, if I was boiled for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. Oh, I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees, for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there? Said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I get anything in by reaching it out. For the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman coolly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Who else's do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say. Hope that he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things, if he did. If you look through that shirt until your eyes ache, you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off him again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's as quite as becoming to the body, and can't look at uglier in that than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped around their spoil in this scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. Laughed the same woman, when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told them their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what it is. He recoiled in terror from the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, upon which, beneath a ragged sheet, and there laid something covered up, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around in an obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon this bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of a man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed at the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honoured head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, and make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous, and true, that the heart brave, warm, and tender, and that the pulse a human's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound, to sow the world with life immortal. No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares. They have brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house, and not a man, a woman, or a child to say he was kind to me in there, was a sound of kind to me in that there or that, and for the memory of one kind word I will be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was the sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in that room of death, why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. Spirit, he said, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. Let us go. Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. I understand you, Scrooge returned, and I would if I could. But I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. Again it seemed to look upon him. If there is any person who feels emotion caused by this man's death, said Scrooge, quite agonized, show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you. The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room of daylight where a mother and children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried, but in vain, to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children in her play. At length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed, and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that she had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed as to how to answer. Is it good, she said, or bad? Bad, he answered. We are quite ruined? No. There is hope yet, Caroline. If he relents, she said, amazed. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened. He is past relenting, said her husband. He is dead. She was a mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth. But she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. What the half-drunken woman I told you of last night told me, when he tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, then what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then. To whom will our debt be transferred? I don't know, but before that time we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be bad fortune indeed to find a merciless creditor so much in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline. Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what so little they understood, were brighter, and it were a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him caused by the event was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with a death, said Scrooge, or that dark chamber spirit which we left just now will be with me for ever. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but was nowhere to be seen. Let me just check how much longer I've got. A fair bit. I'm going to leave it there because that's 40 minutes and there's still a fair bit left to go. So, as you can see, I'm sweaty. So, join me next time for the end of this story, which is an end you probably know quite well, but we'll listen to anyway. Much love to you all for the evening, from me, and Lentil, who is a goober face and a good boy, and a silly Billy. You was a good boy. You were a good boy. Sometimes a good boy. Sometimes a good boy. Anyway, I just thought I'd show you Lentil again because he's so cute. Look at this little fella. Oh, he's such a good boy. And yeah, do you know this is the book I read from, by the way. It's actually got more in it than just the story itself. It's actually very interesting. A Christmas Carol, the unsung story by Brian Bilston Sibley. Not Brian Bilston. That's the poet. Brian Sibley. And it contains the original unedited text of the Christmas Carol, but it also talks a little about Dickens himself and the story and why it was written and all of that stuff. You can still get it, obviously. I've had that copy for a very long time. So I shall see you tomorrow for the last part. Good night.